Hi, I'm Jim Montgomery, and welcome to the Business Exit Blueprint, your roadmap to a profitable sale. We're going to talk a little bit about how your business is really valued, what it's really worth, and part of it is how to sell your business and profit without the pain and hassle, and then go to that beach that you might have always wanted to go to. Hi, I'm Jim Montgomery. I'm a mergers and acquisitions attorney. Some people would say, and the way I usually introduce myself is I buy and sell businesses. We close 50 or more transactions a year, and this is a little outdated, but we've done well over $200 million in the last 5 years. In fact, it's probably more like 300 million at this point. I have been an expert at minimizing the capital gains tax in transactions, but that's not the focus of what we do. So I've done this now well more than 15 years, and I've learned a few things in doing a lot of those transactions. And what I discovered is that all businesses are alike. You may have heard the saying by Dan Kennedy that all businesses are alike. And then he says, yes, but then everybody tells me that my business is different, but that's not really the case. And frankly, most businesses are all alike. They have 6 systems. Most people have not identified them. It's not taught in school. And those are kind of the things we're going to talk about today. Now let's talk about business value. Normally, when you talk about business value, there are different approaches. One is the asset approach. Think about this one. You've got a construction firm. You own a bunch of heavy equipment. You've got probably land that's part of the company's valuation. And we're going to figure out what all of that is worth. And that's what we decide on what the purchase price would be. But that's not really always the best way to do it, although banks love it because they have a lot of equipment and inventory, et cetera, to take a lien on. But you also have to look at the income approach because there are businesses that really don't have a whole lot of assets. And software companies and other businesses that are in the service industry, they may own a few used computers and things and some books and some desks and tables and things, but they don't really have a lot. But what they may have, though, is a very good cash flow. Problem is, a lot of banks don't even know how to lend on that because there's no physical inventory to take a lien on, and it's very difficult for them to do cash flow-based financing. So we also look at a market approach. If I were doing a confidential memorandum for you that provides information on your business, we would look at the market approach. The market approach is, well, how much is a company worth? And we take basically the income that it's got, and we're going to look at what do we value that? Do we look at gross income? Do we look at net income? And what kind of a sales multiple would we put on that? When you look at most businesses, it's usually a 3 to 5 times whatever the net income is of the business to come up with a rough valuation. And that rough valuation is usually pretty close. But let's talk about some other ways and what we really look at when we're looking at buying a business. What's that business worth? First of all, what is the true net income? You've got the tax return income and you've got income that you show on your books. A lot of business owners run a lot of expenses through. So we look at what is the net income. We're going to add back, if they're financing their car or leasing cars, or they have other expenses like even a vacation home that they use for business at times, and the accountant's allowing them to run that through their books, then you're going to add whatever the expenses are for that back to the books, and that gives you a more true net income. Then we're going to look at, well, over the last 3 to 5 years, what's it look like with that business? Is it going up? Is it going down? Does it go up, down? Or is it like we see in a lot of times when we have an older owner, particularly, that they're getting ready to retire and they frankly have 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And usually then we're going down, which is not where you want to be if you're trying to sell the business, but sometimes it is where the buyer wants the business to be doing because they can turn around and do a lot of different things with it. one of the first questions I ask when I'm talking to an owner and doing a deep dive is how many hours a week do you work? If you're working 60, 70 hours a week, you don't really have business. You have a job, and that job is taking a lot of your time. And on the other hand, if you look at me and say you're only working 15 hours a week, then you're now an investor, and maybe that is something that we want to look at. The other thing we're looking at is what kind of systems do they have? And we'll talk about the 6 systems later on in a little bit of detail, but businesses have to be systematized to be passed on to the next owner. Or if something happens to the owner, for that business to continue to operate the way you want it to operate. For example, is there a buy-sell agreement? This is a key thing that we look at. If there are multiple owners and they haven't agreed on what they're going to do, if they don't want to play together anymore, or if something happens to them, that's something that we need to know about, because that may affect the negotiations. But the most important one that we look for is the McDonald's cookbook. You may have heard this story over the years, but you can go into a McDonald's in San Angelo, or you can go into a McDonald's in Seattle, or a McDonald's in Atlanta, Georgia. Order a hamburger, and it's going to come out almost exactly the same everywhere you go. That's because they have systems set up. There are literally videos that the cook in the back has watched over and over again that shows how long you're going to cook that burger on each side. It's going to tell you how big the dollop of ketchup is, how big the dollop of mustard is, and how many pickles are supposed to be on there. And they make it the same way every time. May not be the best hamburger in the world, but it comes out the same every time. And that applies from everything to how do they cook the French fries, to what do they say when you walk in the door. Have you ever called your office and listened to what your receptionist says? At McDonald's, it is practice and practice and practice, and they're going to ask you exactly the same way, and then they're going to ask you to upsell or supersize whatever you've got. But that works from the moment they open the door in the morning, to how they set up for business, how they clean, to the last thing before they go out, how they take out the trash, and how do they clean up, and making sure the door's locked when they leave. And I used to tell the story because of the McDonald's, because even before we had videotape or other video, now it's all on computers, but back before in the early 60s even, I was telling this story to well, I wasn't telling in the 60s, but I was telling about what it was like back in the 60s. And I actually had somebody come up to me afterward and say, I was a teenager working in McDonald's in exactly the time you were talking about. And you're absolutely right. We had a basement at this McDonald's, and you went downstairs, and they had a specifically made machine that showed on a small little TV screen the videos of what it was we were supposed to learn. And we each had a dedicated time to go do that. So this is one of the ways we transfer knowledge within a business. How do you train people so that they can do the same thing every time? Now, there are 3 secrets, and that's why we talk about how do you value your business. There are 3 secrets that are not taught in school that apply to every business. And one is you've got to minimize the owner. If the owner is there every day, the owner is the primary biller, the owner brings in all the business, and everything revolves around the owner, that's a business that's very difficult to pass on to somebody else. We'll talk about how we minimize the owner in a bit. Secret 2 is the systems that we just talked about, and we're going to go into some more depth. The third one is knowledge transfer, that video system or whatever you have. And I'll come back to knowledge transfer in just a little bit. So let's talk about the owner. I sometimes used to say that I wanted to teach the owner how to fire themselves, but most owners don't really react very well to that. So we've talked about how do we minimize you? How do we get you from going 60 to 70 hours a week down to 15 to 30 hours a week, so that you're not working too much, you're working enough to have control, and working enough to be able to make sure everything works right in your business. But let's talk about that business. First of all, is this their business? The baby. You know, for those of you who are parents, you probably have already guessed what I mean by that. Babies require a lot of care. And usually the baby business is one where it's the passion. You know, we hear all the time that we should do businesses where we're following our passion. Well, that's a great idea. Most of these businesses don't make a lot of money. You know, it's the artist who's doing an art business, or it's the fellow who is a welder, and it's a true craft to him. And so he decided to have his own welding business. Sometimes they are profitable. You've got the carpenter who is passionate about how he builds houses, and that person became the builder. Sometimes that's a really rough transition, but it's their baby. And it's very difficult for people to sell their babies, as you might imagine. So that's something that we look for as to the characteristics of a business. The second one is the job. We talked about that a little already, the 60 to 70 hours a week. You know, we work harder and we'll make more money. And I'm sorry, that's not really the way it works, even though that's what everybody keeps saying. But if it's a job, it's very difficult to sell. If you're an accountant, for example, and you bill $150,000 a year, it's going to be very difficult to sell your business for more than that $150,000 total, simply because of the valuation and the involvement of the owner. But now we talk about the investment. If your business is really an investment, let me give you an example. There was this visitor to the Harvard Business School. They invite people to come in from industry. And this gentleman in his late 40s was giving a presentation to the Harvard Business School about his business, what they did. And as he characterized it, he worked about 15 hours a week. He could be anywhere in the world, get out his laptop, be able to go through the financials, see what's going on. He spent his time not on what's going to happen tomorrow, but better, what's going to happen a year from now or 2 years from now, so that he was in the long range planning as opposed to the day-to-day involvement in the business. And as a result of what he had developed, his take home was basically, between some salary and dividends, over $5 million a year. Well, he gets to the end of his presentation, and as normal, there are going to be 2 or 3 that follow out to ask questions afterward. And one of them looks at him and goes, you know, I've been working for an investment firm in spare time, and, you know, we could take your company public and you'd be able to make a lot more money than you're making right now. And you know, we could sell off parts of it and make it even bigger and make more money. And then another one interjects, well, you know, the other thing is that we could just leave it the way it is, but we could double or triple what you're doing. It would take an investment and it would take a lot more time, but I'm sure that we could get it to where your net was at least 15 million a year. And then there's the silence, the pregnant pause, as he just looks at them. And finally he says, just what was it about 15 hours a week and 5 million a year that you didn't get? And actually, if you want to, you can go on Google. This is a true story. And just Google the 15-minute business at the Harvard Business School, and you can read the story. So let's move on. Secret number 2, the systems. Every business has 6 systems. What are they? They're the customer attraction system. This is how customers find you or how you find customers. The customer engagement. This is what happens when you make your sales pitch and you close and get the business to be done. The third one is the customer service. This is where you actually do whatever it is that you do, deliver the product that you sold, perform the service that's out there. The next one is customer retention. This is how you get people to come back to you. Most businesses are focused on getting the first sale, but what about the other sales? What do you do to keep the customers coming back to you? Then there's the employee system. And it's not really what you'd call HR. It's more like, how do they know they're doing a good job and doing it correctly? And the last one is finance, flash reports. And I'm going to talk about those in just a little bit. Let's go back to the customer systems. And this is an area where you may get some information that you'd like to have for your own business right now. Customer attraction. Now, how do customers find you? Are they referrals? Do you advertise? What happens there? How do you do the engagement, the close? How do you do your customer service? How do you do customer retention? There are 3 ways to get exponential growth in a business. 1, you get more people coming in the door. 2, you increase the number of people that you close. 3, you increase the value of the customer. That could be even the increase in the average transaction value. In other words, if you normally charge $500, if you go to $600, or you increase the number of transactions. Maybe they only buy from you once, but you find a way to get them to come back in and buy something else from you a second time. So they're doing more than one transaction with you. A lot of businesses are focused solely on that sole transaction rather than the lifetime value of a customer. The sales funnel. The target customers are up at the top and you're trying to get them to come to you in some way. Maybe you're doing YouTube or Twitter or Facebook or referrals from accountants and financial people. A lot of my business comes that way. People know what I do, and I get valuation experts to send me somebody who's looking for somebody to get their transaction done or to sell their business, or it's a financial advisor who says, I've been working with so-and-so for so long, and it's time now for them to sell their business and they need some help. But they all come through the sales funnel like that. So one of the things that we do when we do our initial business evaluation is, who is that target customer? How old are they? Where do they congregate? What do they buy? Do they have children? What area of town do they live in? All those kinds of things that allow you to then find, how do I reach more of them at once? You have traffic sources. I talked about referrals. You can buy lists of people. There's networking. My wife jokes sometime about she can always tell when I'm in the process of looking for new businesses. I have lots of breakfasts and I take people to lunch, face to face. Another really good one is LinkedIn. That may be why you're here today, is we reached out to you through LinkedIn from a search for business owners and founders, and then sent you an invite. The other one that a lot of people use is trade shows, because there are a lot of the target customers in one place at a trade show. Giving speeches, webinars, like I'm doing today. Advertising. A lot of businesses are really good at Facebook advertising, or they're good at doing TV spots. And there's a difference between direct advertising, where you're reaching directly to that person and you can trace that they're coming to you from that advertising, as opposed to, let's call it brand advertising. You buy an ad in a newspaper or an ad in a magazine or a billboard or something like that, where you can tell that out there is you're getting exposure, but you may not be able to ever say that any one person came to you because of that. But as you go, the whole opportunity here is to build your list. You capture information. Could be names, emails, snail mail, phone, birthdays, month and day, whatever you need to be able to stay in touch with those. When we go to sell a business or we go to buy a business, one of the first things we look at is the major asset of the business. That's the list. Because when you sell something, primarily what you're selling is your customer list. And when you go to buy a business, what you really want to find is a business that has a large customer list to buy. So let's talk about 3 ways you can have exponential growth in your business. Standard is, okay, if I have 200 prospects coming in the door and I can close 20% of them, that means I've got 40 customers. If my average price for whatever it is I'm selling or I'm doing is $1,000, that means I'll have 40 times $1,000 or $40,000 in gross sales. But small improvements in each area can give you dramatic growth. So let's take a few examples. All right. Let's say we're just going to increase the number of prospects. So instead of pitching to 200 people, we pitch to 240 people. Again, we're going to close 20%. Well, I'm now going to have 8 more customers than I had before. Another $1,000 a piece gives me a total of $48,000. That's great. That's a good result from what we did. But let's look at it another way. What if we don't get more prospects, but we increase our closing ratio? We go from 20% to 24%. Well, that still gives us 8 more customers. $1,000 a piece, another $8,000. Good result. Well, let's look at it another way. What if we raised our prices by $200? So we got the same number of prospects, we have the same closing ratio, we still have 40 customers, but now we have $1,200 a piece. So we got $48,000. So that's 3 different ways that you could go about to increase your sales. But let's look at another little secret here. What if we did more? What if we did all of them at the same time? We increased our number of prospects, we increased our closing ratio, we increase the number of customers, we increase our price, and we didn't just get $48,000, we're now up to $69,120. That is a 72.8% growth in your sales. And there are 2 more levers that are even more important that we have not discussed yet. And when we talk, we'll talk about those. And without spending an additional dime on advertising, it's quite possible for you to at least double your sales. Now we're to secret number 3, knowledge transfer. My favorite example of this goes back to World War II. Submarines. You're in a boat, probably under the water for a large part of the time. Everybody on the boat had to learn what everybody else on the boat did. And they called it earning your dolphins. And they had little dolphins that were you could tell the ones who had succeeded and had earned their dolphins because they proudly wore those on their uniform. But for example, the cook in the galley, who back then usually was a black man, was treated equally pretty much on a submarine, and was then, he was in the torpedo room, or maybe he was learning how to drive the boat at the, with the planes, et cetera, where you see it on the movies where they're sitting there and they've got a little wheel that they're turning. But every person on the boat, every job on the boat had to have somebody or more than somebody learn that same job, because you never knew who might get hurt, killed, et cetera, and not be available. In your business, who's going to replace the receptionist? Who's going to replace other people within it? And do they each know their jobs, or are they going to suddenly have to go learn their job? One of my favorite stories again about this is I have a client who's been in business for quite a while, and he has some old machinery that he got when he went into business, and it's a sorter. And it's an old mechanical, but it's motor driven, and it sorts the product that he sells. I'm not going to say more than that. And every now and then we'd be talking on the phone, and one day he said, "Hold on a second, I've got to go do something. My sorter has broken down." And he said, came back about 15, 20 minutes later, called me back, and he said, "I got it done." And I asked him, I said, what is it you have to do? He said, "Well, you've got to rearrange and change out this one piece. You don't have to replace anything, but it just gets stuck and it gets in the wrong position." And he said, "The problem is that I don't do this frequently enough to really remember how to do it. So it takes me a few minutes when I get out there to do nothing more than figure out what was it I did the last time to make this work." So I suggested to him, I said, hey, the next time you do it, take your phone with you and put it on video and video yourself and talk through what you're doing, kind of like what I'm doing today in the webinar, so that you could then replay it and you'd be easily able to remember what it was. He says, that should do that. It'd be a great idea. In fact, he did do that. And after he did it, again, we were talking, he says, hey, I did video that the other day. And, it only breaks down like every 6 months or so. I said, well, tell you what, the next time, instead of you going to fix it, hand your iPhone to whoever it is you want to fix it and tell him to watch the video and see if he can get it fixed. Sure enough, that worked too. So that's a perfect example of knowledge transfer. And you, for example, may have something in your business that is done that it's done in a certain way, but it's not written down, or there's no checklist or whatever. One does not try to land an airplane without consulting the checklist. It's very easy to try to land the plane, and if you forget to put the landing gear down because you're trying to do it in your head, could have some disastrous results. All right. We talked about knowledge transfer. We talked about the 3 secrets, but let's finish up the 6 systems. The employee system. First of all, how do you delegate? It's not something that's really taught in school at all. And in fact, you may never have learned to do it very well. I was lucky in that I had a lawyer early on in my career who had a system for doing this. He would call you into his office. He would tell you the facts of what he wanted done. And he'd say, here's the question that I want answered. He said, now, did you get all that down? I want you to write it down, send me a memo that's addressed to you from me, telling you what I want done. And then he would go over the memo with you, and you either had listened carefully or you'd not, but I knew exactly what I was supposed to do when it was delegated. Try that the next time you're trying to delegate to an employee to make sure you're completely understood. Training. A lot of places you hire people and you think they already know it because they've been in business for a long time. But you have to have a training program that actually trains your people to do the jobs that they're in and continually updating that training. Evaluation. This is the hardest part, but this is how employees know they're doing a good job. When the person comes back from giving you the memo, says what they're going to do, and then they have accomplished the task, you want to go over with them. Okay, you did a great job here. You followed all the instructions, and I appreciate what you did. Those are magic words to every employee because it doesn't happen that way very often. All right, the 6th system, financial. How do you know what your business is doing? We all know about profit and loss statements and balance sheets. They're great ideas, and they do give you good information. And I assure you that when we go into do the due diligence to buy a company, we're looking at those really hard. But what about in the meantime? You get an income statement and a balance sheet 15 days, 30 days after the month's already over. Kind of hard to do anything once the month's already over. What else should you really be looking at? Well, we call them flash reports. For example, every Friday afternoon or Monday morning, do you look at your bank balance to see how much money you have? Do you get a report of accounts payable? In other words, out of the money that's in the bank, what am I going to have to pay out over the next 2 weeks? In other words, do I have a cash flow problem that I'm going to need to deal with? Maybe you go out beyond 2 weeks to 4 weeks. Do you also have an accounts receivable report so that you see what money is going to come in during those 2 weeks to see, again, is there going to be a cash flow problem? Maybe you're in a business where your target customer has to be called on a regular basis, or you're looking to create more prospects. What sales reports are you getting? Are you saying how many calls are being made by each person each week? How many closings have been scheduled? Going back to those spreadsheets we were looking at just a little bit ago. Those are all very important things. And those flash reports, sometimes they're called key performance indicators, KPIs. They differ from one to another because of the way your business may operate. On the other hand, they're telling the same story no matter which kind of business you have. So we've gone through the steps. We've talked about the 3 secrets. What's the next step? What, what's it like to work with us? Well, we like to start off with what we call the business assessment package. And we're going to go in and with you talk about who your target customer is, maybe teach you a few things you haven't even thought about yet. Then we're going to do an overview, deep dive. How's the business now? Where do you see it in 5 years? If there's one thing you could fix, what would you fix? And it goes a lot deeper than that. We spend at least an hour and sometimes more. It just gets going and you talk about all the things that you'd like to do with the business. Then we look at a hard financial analysis of your business. The last 3 years' tax returns, year to date, profit and loss, balance sheets. What's the history of the been? Are we going up? We're going down, just like we talked about earlier. Then we're going to talk about marketing. What is your marketing strategy? What would we do? First thing we look at when we go to buy a business is how do we double or triple the amount of business that it's doing? I mean, we don't buy it just to be able to get what it's got right there. We want whatever the future is going to be in it, because that's where the real money comes when you buy a business. Buying a business is just like buying a house, except that a house doesn't have any income. Rental houses have income, but maybe they don't have cash flow all the time. Most businesses do have cash flow if you've done everything right and are operating properly. We used to buy some of the big buildings in town, and their businesses, just like anything else, you go through the same due diligence process you do with a regular business. And then we prepare what we call the confidential information memo. I refer to it short term as SIM. And that's a complete overview of your business. It tells you what your business looks like. In other words, if I'm a buyer and I'm looking at your business, am I going to find that business, sexy? Is it going to be something that I want? Or is there a business there that I've got a lot of work to do on? It's more like a turnaround than it is anything else. That's what we do first, and then we decide where to go from there. And that's all done on a fixed price basis. So next steps, you can go to my website, jamesmontgomerylaw.com. Usually you can go on the calendar, although we've had some little issues with that lately. We need to change providers and be able to see what an open date is and when we can schedule to do an initial talk. No charge. We just talk. What are you interested in doing? Where do you see your business going? What do you want to be doing? Or give me a call, 210-690-3700. You'll find that always gets answered by the answering service, and that is immediately recorded and transcribed and sent to me so that we don't lose track of anybody, and we can always give you a call back or give me an email, jim@jamesmontgomerylaw.com. I've enjoyed talking with you today. I hope you got some good information out of this, and I look forward to talking to you in the near future. Have a great day.